I came up with a new way of cutting onions today. So you know the traditional method, you cut it from top to tail and in half, and then you kind of do 3 little segments, and then you cut the segments into little bits. What I did, and this was quite innovative, is I cut it halfways at the halfway point between top and tail, and then I put it face down and cut around it like little rays of sunlight around the onion, and then I just held it down and cut along the edges. And I think it's a better way of cutting onions. Hello and welcome to.
That's great. Oh, I just wanted to say before we start, have you seen Red Letter Media's video that they uploaded yesterday?
Was it about the Cloverfield thing?
Yeah, the Cloverfield paradox. Yeah.
I saw it like on there, but it was just one of those things where
So obviously I watched it yesterday, and when you watch it, you'll see that they mention Manchester by the Sea twice in that review.
Gasp!
Which is kind of crazy. Of course, the film Cloverfield Paradox has nothing to do with Manchester by the Sea. They mention it once because of the fact that Amazon Studios, I think, produced Cloverfield Paradox. Oh no, they were just saying how like Amazon's getting into the movie business.
Yeah.
Amazon's producing good movies like Manchester by the Sea, and then later on, apparently, what in the Cloverfield Paradox, some kids burn to death, and then they go, oh, just like in Manchester by the Sea. Spoilers. Now, the thing is, I had already seen, like they say spoilers jokingly, but I had already seen Manchester by the Sea. But if I hadn't have seen it, and then had just seen that review,
yeah,
obviously that had been, I was looking forward to watching that. That's a big thing you've just
spoiled. It is quite a significant spoiler. I have seen before, like, I'm sure it is actually Red Letter Media who spoiled something. I can't remember what it was, but they did spoil something that I wanted to watch, and I was like, but to be honest, the fact that I've forgotten what it was is maybe a good thing. Maybe I should watch everything I want to watch before I remember what it is they spoiled.
Yes, good idea.
Hello and welcome to Select and Reflect, the movie review podcast where we look at films that have come out relatively recently at the cinema and see whether or not they still hold up upon a second viewing. As always, I am your host, Michael, and I'm joined by my co-host, Luke. And today we are talking about Manchester by the Sea. Why don't you tell us a thing or two about that, Luke?
So, Manchester by the Sea, directed by Kenneth Lonergan, produced by Matt Damon, who I was reading originally was meant to play Lee Chandler, the lead role, but Casey Affleck, the one who stars as Lee Chandler, obviously won an Oscar for Best Actor in that role, came out in January 23rd, 2016, so just over 2 years ago. And do you want to have a guess at the budget? I mean, it's less significant, obviously.
No.
It's a smaller movie.
Yeah, I'm gonna go for 25 million.
No, you're quite a bit off there, Michael. It's only 8.5 million.
Okay, I was thinking. You know what? I had in my head the budget for 50 Shades of Grey being 40 million, and I was thinking, okay, and it's like, I mean, obviously. It's just like they're both films where there's no special effects, but yeah, 8 million is a more reasonable number for this. And I guess A-listers.
Yeah. Now you think about it, why did 50 Shades of Grey have such a massive budget?
Yeah,
like Darker had $55 million.
It's an extortion.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Anyway, that was last week.
Yes.
This week we're in Manchester by the Sea.
Very similar films.
Yes. Do you want to guess the box office?
I feel like I'm completely lost on this kind of thing. So I'm going to go for 80 million.
That is
Lower.
A very good guess.
Oh, okay.
That is a very good guess. Yeah, 77.7 million.
I feel like I always get one. Like, but yeah. That's not bad.
No, that's very good guess.
And also, by the way, I mean, you didn't mention this, but it won Best Screenwriter. Just for those who don't know, it won the Best Screen. So it's it's earned its place, at least in terms of its accolades, on our discussion about last year's Oscar winners.
Yes.
But did you like it, Luke?
It was. Yeah, I don't know if I liked it, but I appreciated it.
I
How
think
about that?
yeah, I pretty much agree with you. I mean, last week when we finished talking about 50 Shades of Grey in our longest ever instalment of this show, I mentioned that we were going to be reviewing Manchester by the Sea, and I described it as a good film. And what I really meant when I said that was it's a good film compared to 50 Shades of Grey. And of course, I mean, it's a very competent film, and
Yeah.
certainly I think it's... Well, we'll get into exactly to what extent we think it's good. But, of course, with all films, we have nitpicks, although I have apparently quite a few more.
Yeah. So I'll just get mine out of the way first.
Yes.
And I've only got one, and it's the fact that the movie logos at the start were too long.
We're not becoming CinemaSins.
No, that's the thing. I was thinking of CinemaSins. Like, he always does this, like a sin. Like whenever he starts the videos, it's like 40 seconds of logo, and then a ding.
Yeah.
But these logos were 1.5 minutes long.
Wow.
I just couldn't believe it. Yeah, it was. It just didn't start the movie. I kept expecting the movie to start, and just another logo coming up, and then it was a film by, what's the director called again?
Colin Lonergan. Lonergan?
Kenneth Lonergan, yes.
I don't know what else he's done.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And it was just like, Jesus Christ, you really don't want to start the movie? Like, so that was my only nitpick.
Okay.
And I know, I recognise, it was a kind of a CinemaSins thing to do. But
yeah. Alright, well, my nitpicks. Some of mine are, I mean, these are a variety of nitpicks, some of which I almost feel like, I don't think I'm wrong on them, but okay, so, when we were talking about Arrival, I mentioned how I thought it was very weird that they didn't seem to acknowledge that the Chinese writing system uses concepts instead of sounds.
I'm looking forward to how you're going to relate these two things.
Well, the thing is, what I said in it is I said, like, it seems like such an obviously incorrect thing that I kind of struggle to believe that it was, not intentional, or that it was actually a mistake. And in this case, there's a scene where they're eating... I've forgotten the son's name is... Oh, I'm going to get this. Its name is... It's not Dylan. What's the son's name?
What, you mean the main...
Yeah, the
son?
main son in the film.
You mean Patrick?
Patrick.
How did you forget his name?
I'm so bad. I'm awful.
It's like one of the two main characters.
He's eating around his second girlfriend's house, and his mum has made spaghetti, and he says, "Is this a homemade carbonara sauce?" Now you can clearly see that the sauce he is eating is red. Now, Luke, do you know what a carbonara sauce is?
Yes, I know what a carbonara sauce is.
And would you say that a carbonara sauce is red?
This is really nitpicking.
You know what?
Like,
I mean, it's very weird in a way, because like I say, I mean, I can only assume that maybe it's supposed to be like he's kind of intentionally showing that he doesn't really know what he's talking about. I have another. I mean, I
don't think so.
I stand by this nitpick. When he's first driving over to Manchester, not your Manchester, Manchester by the Sea, he's driving along and he honks at this guy who's in front of him at an intersection, and then after that we clearly see, there's one car right in front of this guy, and then there are two more cars that come after that, and I just, you know what? I know you're going to say, "Oh well, he's angry or he's stressed."
Yeah,
and things like
that's
that.
exactly what I'm going to say.
But I think there's nothing that takes me out of a film more than inappropriate honking.
Wow.
You see it in a film, just people start honking, and you think, would they really honk in that situation? I mean, what's he going to do? What's he going to do, Lee Chandler?
Okay, yes, he that was stupid, but his brother just died.
Yes,
so,
I'll forgive that.
I'm not going to consider that a nitpick.
other nitpick, of course, and you can't argue with this one. His name is Lee Chandler, but he doesn't handle any leeches in the entire film.
Wow.
No, I didn't even write that down. So I think, okay, one other thing, and again, maybe this is silly. I mean, all of mine are kind of silly. So I guess it's kind of just this had a high density of just things that didn't really bother me, but kind of bothered me. Or really, this one isn't one that bothered me, but I'm kind of surprised, and I don't know if I would call this a nitpick again, because this is more just I'm surprised this is the case. I'm surprised that you don't get in any trouble at all for not practicing basic fire safety. Because, of course, Lee goes to the police station after his house has got burnt down, and he tells them that he left an open fire in his house and didn't put up a fire guard. And they say, oh, you're not going to get in trouble for that. And I actually would have expected that it would count as criminal neglect if you've got children to not practice some degree of fire safety. And I don't know, I mean, obviously, again, I'm not saying that's a problem with the film, but I'm actually kind of surprised that you don't get in any real trouble for, endangering the lives of your own children by his own admission.
Yeah, I was thinking it might be like manslaughter or something like that.
Yeah.
But obviously not.
But yeah, so again, that's not too bad. The other thing that I want to talk about, and again, I mean, this falls under the category of, this is a quite arty film, and I use arty a lot in this show, but when I say arty, you know what I mean. And one of the things it has, of course, is the stereotypical character in an art film doesn't really talk very much. But the other thing it has, which I notice happens a lot in these types of films, is it's this fantasy world where weird introverts seem to constantly be garnering a lot of female attention. He seems to not be able to leave the house without having a woman come onto him, and you just think like, yeah.
I think that's just because Casey Affleck is.
Yeah,
he's a good looking guy.
He is a pretty good looking guy. In fact,
yeah.
I would probably say that no woman would ever turn him down, and if they did, he would be very respectful about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Because he's so attractive.
Yeah.
So
if there was a woman that turned Casey Affleck down, there must be something wrong with her.
Yeah, she's a freak. Shame on her.
Yeah, he'd be well within his right to correct the situation.
Yes. If anything, it's a public service. So, okay. Other nitpick. He seems to. So this was my interpretation of one of the central conflicts of the film. A thing that goes on throughout the entire film is he doesn't want to stay in Manchester. He wants to go to Boston. Now, obviously, the reason seems to be that he doesn't want to stay in Manchester because he has a negative association with that place, quite understandably. But one of the weird things about it is that if that's his reason, then he doesn't need to go to Boston. He could have gone, because there's a bit where his son says, I can go to live in Essex with my mum. A lot of places in New England that are just named after places in England, which is a bit confusing. Essex is, of course, a stone's throw away from Manchester. But yeah, he says, I can go live in Essex. And the thing is, it's very clearly set up that he is happy, the son, to live in somewhere other than Manchester by the Sea. He just doesn't want to live somewhere as far away as Boston. And it seems to me like Lee's only reason, and again, he never states his reason throughout the entire film, but it seems to me like the reason he doesn't want to live in Manchester is because he has a negative association with it. So I would just think immediately, well, why don't they just move to somewhere that's not in Manchester, but is close enough for Patrick. Yeah. So I mean, again, that's.
But then Lee would have to move to Quincy.
Yeah.
And that would be a whole other thing. Think of all the organisation that would have to go into that.
Yes. But yeah, I think. I mean, obviously, it seemed to me like, who would want to live in Boston? Go Sox. And then.
Go Sox.
One other thing, there were several things in the film, and we'll kind of get into this a bit more when we talk about the plot, but I'm just going to bring this up to tickle your taste buds in that regard. several things in the plot which I do think don't really get explained. And there's a scene where Lee Chandler, it's kind of about 3/4 of the way through the film, he walks into a local kind of shop, I guess, by the harbour, and he says, "Hey there, I'm going to be around until the summer. Do you have any jobs?" And while he's talking to this person, you get this shot of a woman in the back room, kind of listening, hearing, and then when Lee Chandler leaves, she says, "I don't want him in the store again."
Yeah, I was going to bring that up
later,
but if you're using it as a nitpick, I guess I'll talk about it now.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, it could easily come up under general issues of plot, but yeah, there doesn't seem to be any explanation there. I mean, you can infer an explanation and be like, well, maybe she doesn't like that he punches people at random, or something like that. But yeah, she never says why.
Well, I actually looked, because I was curious about this. I looked at the plot, section on the Wikipedia page.
I actually find that very useful, looking at that. But,
yeah, and he says that he's an outcast in Manchester, which I don't really get, because if 3 of your kids died and it was an accident, albeit you killed them, but it was still an accident, I would imagine that you'd receive sympathy and not derision. But obviously, that's not the case in this particular town, and I assume that person is like, nah, I don't want him here because of what happened. Obviously, everyone in the town knows what happened. Obviously, you get the principal and the school that Patrick goes to saying, yeah, the Lee Chandler.
Yes, that's that one.
And the Patrick's hockey teammates say, oh, that story was bullshit. Obviously referencing the story of his kids dying. So everybody knows about him, everyone knows his story. But I'm just surprised that he is an outcast.
I'm surprised, and to be honest, I didn't get the impression. If you would have told me just basing it on the film, I didn't get the impression he was an outcast. Or the thing is, I mean, what's more apparent in the film, obviously, is that he is self-isolated. You don't get the impression that no one wants to hang around him. You get the impression he's. But anyway, I suppose we'll get into that a bit later.
I was just going to say, I don't think it's necessary for the plot that he is an outcast. In fact, if he wasn't an outcast, it would make it more impactful that he doesn't want to go back to Manchester.
Yeah, I guess maybe she didn't want him around because she's apparently the only woman in Manchester who doesn't want to have sex with him.
Okay.
And then this is the last one, and again, you could put this under kind of talking about the characters, but I put it here. I mean, these things, it's kind of arbitrary, but Patrick, first of all, I wanted to say, facially, he kind of reminded me of Jack Bartle.
Yes.
And we had a nickname for Jack Bartle at university, which was Virgin. And we called him that. Not because he was a fan of Richard Branson, but because he had in fact never known a woman. Until the third year of university. So, actually no, it was during the summer of the second year. Let's give him some credit. It was during the summer of the second year.
Okay.
But obviously, he looks kind of like him. So just in my head, it was stretching my credulity a bit to see that this guy, apparently, number one, he has 2 girlfriends who he is banging, and then number 2, he has 2 other girls who at one point kind of greet him and they're like, hey, are you coming to... I can't remember what the thing was called. It was a weird name for something and I'm not even sure what the thing was. But anyway, and Lee's like, oh, you're also your girlfriends? And he's like, they wish. And again, I mean, aside from the fact that he looks like someone we personally know who was a virgin, he's also just generally not particularly
attractive.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, so it is a bit unbelievable.
So I'm glad you brought this up because I've got something to say about this. See, that actor, Lucas Hedges, is also in the movie Lady Bird, which I have seen. And in that movie...
he's a porn star.
No, he's not a porn star. He is also in high school, and he is meant to be like the sort of guy in high school, like the most attractive person there at that high school.
Yeah.
And I just and here's the thing, that it makes sense in Lady Bird because the whole point is that It's based in Sacramento, and the girl who was called Lady Bird, Cerise Ronan, thinks Sacramento's shit, and it's seen throughout the film that Sacramento is just shit. That's one of the major points of the film, and therefore, who's the hottest guy at the high school is this guy who isn't actually that hot.
Oh, okay.
So it makes sense in Lady Bird, but in this movie, yeah, I can understand your thinking.
Yes, and that is all of my nitpicks. So, and obviously none of those really make the film worse, but I stand by them.
Okay, there you go.
So
yeah, I mean the carbonara sauce, that was so petty.
2 out of 10.
That's proper CinemaSins level of sinning.
Yes. So, as for the film itself, I think possibly start by talking about the acting, because I mean this is a film about a person. It's a character study, if you will, and therefore, I think it's worth looking at the guy who won the Oscar and things like that. I mean, I guess you probably thought the acting was quite good.
I did, especially Casey Affleck, and obviously I said before that Matt Damon was originally intending to play Lee Chandler, and I don't know, I couldn't imagine Matt Damon in this role. He seems too I guess hunkish. I don't know. Brooding.
It would be like Mark Wahlberg in The Happening.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, Casey Affleck's got a soft voice.
No, yeah.
That works very well in this film. I think Casey Affleck's acting was really good. I think he thoroughly deserved that Oscar that he won. The scene, you remember the scene with his ex-wife Sandy? When she's got her baby.
Last scene, yeah. I mean, not the last scene, but very towards the end, yeah.
Yeah. So that scene right there was great. When he's trying not to get emotional, just you can see his pain. Yeah, I think that was amazing. It
was a portrayal with a degree of subtlety to it, which I quite liked. One of the things that I also kind of liked about the film actually is that, and this is something. One of the things I will say about this film generally is that I actually preferred the beginning to the ending in a lot of ways, and I found at the beginning there was a bit of a darkly comedic aspect to it, especially when they were talking. Obviously, he goes to the hospital because his brother Joe Chandler, played by Kyle Chandler, is dead. And I think they have a conversation that's kind of very subdued and subtle, and there's something kind of funny about it. There's just kind of the way they're just like, I'm so sorry for your loss, and then he's just like, thank you, and it's like, I don't know. I mean, it's one of those things where you kind of, I think it was very sort of believable in a way. You can imagine that is actually how. Kind of the full scale. There's a bit where he just goes like, the bit I really like was when he goes kind of, oh fuck this, because
that was
and
great.
Then, and then they're like kind of whatever, and then he's like sorry, and then they all come in like, no, don't worry about it. And I thought that was it was very, very human and very kind of enjoyable.
Yeah. Well, you got anything else to say in the acting?
I kind of wanted to say something about the acting by the other guy,
Lucas Hedges. Okay, so interestingly, Kyle Chandler is listed above Lucas Hedges in starring.
I think it's because he's more famous, obviously.
In it much more.
Yeah, I know. It's one of those things where like, so do you know this show on Dave called Modern Life is Goodish, where he just kind of talks about things, basically, it's stand-up. But he was talking about kind of the idea that a lot of the time films will just list cameos as stars, like top-billed stars, because it makes the film more successful. And a really good example of that is there's a film based on, who's the guy? Alan Bennett. He is a kind of famous monologuer. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. Kind of a poet sort of guy. But there was a film about him called The Lady in the Van, and James Corden has a scene in it where he just says he's like working at a farmer's market, and it's kind of like a bit comedic, and he's like, "All right there, oh, I'm working at a farmer's market," and it's literally a cameo, and his name is top billed on the thing. So yeah, I think that's probably explains it. Lucas Hedges. Well, first of all, the one thing I noticed about him is he is actually from Moonrise Kingdom, which was what I immediately recognised him from. Now, Moonrise Kingdom is a film by Wes Anderson, and we will be doing The Grand Budapest Hotel by Wes Anderson at one point. What's interesting is that the girl who plays Julia is her name, I think.
I can't remember.
The brunette girl. I think it's Julia and Sandy. No, Sylvia.
Yeah, Sylvia. Yeah.
There it is. Yeah, Sylvia. The girl who plays her is from Moonrise Kingdom as well. And the only thing that I was thinking about that is that because obviously we're going to talk about, well, I'm going to talk about Wes Anderson a bit when we talk about the Grand Budapest Hotel. I think I'm right in saying you haven't watched any Wes Anderson films, and if you had watched them, you would know he's one of those directors. You can't have accidentally watched one of his films. And those films are kind of very kind of quirky, and in some ways they're almost like have a lot in common with this film, but they're infinitely happier. And I think you could see the good acting shining through from the fact that they've probably worked with some, well, at least a director who's quite good at doing these kind of smaller, low key stories. And the other thing that I also wanted to say, and just kind of the last thing I think on the acting, is that there was one scene in the film. I'll say this as well, because I said I didn't really like the second part so much. What I found with the second part of the film, and this is again going a bit into kind of broader points, but I found that in the second part of the film I found it a bit lackluster, but with a few really great scenes. And obviously the one really great scene was the scene with him and his wife, but another really good scene I thought was when the kid has a panic attack, and there's this, obviously there's meat in the freezer, and it falls out, and he's trying to put it back in, and you get again a very kind of, it's not over the top, it's sort of subtle, and it's also, I think, very human in that it starts with something that you think's kind of like small. It's like, oh, some meat's falling out of the freezer, put it back, oh, he banged his head, and then it builds up, and then of course it ends with, because his dad is being kept in a freezer until the ground falls.
I mean, I didn't put that as, well, basically what I was thinking about that was, okay, I didn't really understand why he's having a panic attack over it. It's not explained, but obviously, I don't think it needs to be explained. I guess it's perfectly, well, it's not normal, but you can have a panic attack over meat.
Yeah, exactly. And I thought,
freezer,
it was
no, you're right. That was good.
And I think it was also quite a good opportunity to have like the character of Lee seem a bit more relatable, because he actually does kind of show that, of course, he cares, and he is active.
Shows that he does care more, and is like you say, more active in being the guardian of Patrick.
Yeah, and tentatively there's maybe a bit of an idea of like, obviously he has a kind of complex about his own limitations as a guardian, understandably, because he killed his kids. So because there's a bit where he kind of just says like, oh, I can't handle the fact you're having a panic attack. So if you are having a panic attack, or if you're going to have a panic attack every single time you see frozen meat, then we should take you to the hospital. And obviously that's kind of very logical and like clever, but at the same time there's an element of it kind of is a microcosm of his whole kind of character, which is, I can't handle this, you need to be taken to somewhere else. And I think it's kind of an interesting miniature study of the whole relationship.
I guess so.
So the other thing we need to talk about is, of course, the screenwriting, because it won an Oscar for screenwriting. I wanted to say, by the way, I was so close to saying at the start of this that it won an Oscar for Best Screensaver, and I don't know. But no, it didn't win an Oscar for best screensaver.
I just wanted to say, props to whoever decided to set this story in New England / Boston, because I think this kind of story fits perfectly in with Boston.
Yes, you wanted to talk about Boston, didn't you?
Yeah. So this, I think generally this movie, it couldn't have been set in any other part of America and had the same impact, because I think I know a bit about like the New England area, and obviously in this movie there was some beers, there was sports, and there was depression, and I think that sums up Boston very well, those three factors.
That's true.
Yeah.
And Catholics.
Yes, and Catholics. Yeah, there was a bit of talk about religion as well. So yeah, there you go. But I just wanted to tell you, Michael, I have pinpointed when this movie is set.
Where or when?
Yeah,
Sorry.
And I did this
Yeah.
because in some scenes there are NBA games being played.
Yes.
And so I managed to work out that Joe dies the day after, the 6th of December 2015. So he dies on the 7th of December 2015, because on the 6th of December 2015, the Celtics lost to the San Antonio Spurs. And obviously from the TV that Lee's watching, you can hear the commentators say the Celtics are down by 10. And of course the movie's set in the winter, so 6th of December, that all fits. And the day after Lee gets into a fight at the bar, later on in the movie.
Yeah.
That is on the 19th of January 2016, when the Celtics lost to the Dallas Mavericks in overtime. And I like how the two bits. No, I've got a point to this.
I know. I'm impressed.
Yeah.
But it's a laugh of impressedness.
Yeah, the two bits of sports action that you see. Obviously, there needs to be sports because it's a movie set in Boston. The two bits of sport action you see is games in which the Celtics lose. Now, I imagine that the editor or whoever was tasked with this, putting these sport highlights or sports commentary, made sure to get clips from games in which Boston lost. I'm convinced that was the case, because Boston didn't lose that much that season, 2015 to 2016. They made the playoffs, so losses were quite rare. So I think they did that deliberately.
Oh wow,
I think they took footage or clips from those games deliberately because they were the ones that the Celtics lost in, and of course it fits in with the theme of the movie, of losing or depression or whatever. So yeah, I just thought, I noticed that. I just want to give them props for that. If that is, of course, what they intended to do. Maybe I'm reading far too much into this.
No, I mean I can definitely see your logic to it,
Yeah.
and that could very well be true. And it's interesting, I suppose, to get a bit of a kind of time frame on roughly when the film is or what period it's set over. You say 7th of December?
Yeah. So the game is played on the 6th of December, and then Joe, Lee's brother, dies on the 7th of December.
Okay, what's interesting about that actually is that means that Christmas goes by completely unacknowledged.
They just didn't show Christmas. It wouldn't fit in with the movie, though, would it?
Well, yeah, I don't know. See, I think I've seen a film before where something kind of like bad happens, like someone dies, and then there is Christmas, and I think there's something inherently quite cinematic about Christmas on a sad occasion, or like something sad happens and then it's Christmas. It might have been, I don't know. I mean, obviously, the film is doesn't necessarily want for this, but I don't think necessarily there's anything wrong with having a scene showing acknowledgement that it's Christmas, but at the same time, none of the characters are acting like it's Christmas, which could have been a bit of an interesting contrast. I do feel like maybe, now that you mention it, when he walks into the scene I mentioned earlier, when he walks into the harbour shop thing, whatever it is, to ask for a job, I think I remember there were some Christmas decorations in the shop, but now I'm doubting myself. I might just be projecting it in my mind. But I think maybe there was a tight some kind of Christmas decorations around. But yeah, you can't ignore Christmas.
No, you can't ignore
yes.
Christmas.
That is, yeah. I think that's probably the type of thing that an editor would do, and congratulations for noticing it.
Oh, you're welcome, Michael. I mean, I had to look because I like basketball. I just had to see if what was the scores in each of the games, and what the dates were. But yeah, no. Overall, going back to my original point about Boston.
Yes.
The movie is set well. Like I said before, this movie works very well in New England / Boston. But yeah, go on.
Well, yeah, I think it needs the coldness for one thing.
Yes.
And the sea, and so it could be Chicago.
Exactly.
Even though Chicago does get very cold.
What about Minnetonka, Minnesota?
Minnetonka, Minnesota.
Minnetonka, sorry.
Minnetonka,
Minnesota. It's Minnetonka, Minnesota. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, yeah.
I also think that that the kind of Boston accent or Massachusetts accent is a good accent to argue with a significant other in. You're just like your father. That's
your father.
Okay, that's my fantastic. But yeah, I think you can kind of. It's a very emotional accent, actually.
It is. Yeah.
It's like the. I can't think of another emotional accent. I was going to say. Apparently, people say that the reason why Coronation Street does relatively well is because the northern accent, or I guess, the Manchester area accent, is considered quite dramatic. It's considered to be both funny and dramatic. It's a good thing to make a joke in, and it's also a good accent to tell someone you're going to kill them in.
Yeah. I think the Boston accent is very aggressive. That's the word I used to describe it, and of course that works in movies with a lot of conflict between characters.
Yes.
Who know each other.
Now, obviously, I did already do this introduction, but of course, just to you jumped in with your Boston point, which is very valid of you because I'd forgotten you were going to make it, and it's a very good point. So, but obviously, this film won an Oscar for the best screenwriter. I did think, obviously, one of the things I was kind of thinking in my head is this is a film where there's not that much talking, and therefore it's kind of like funny that screenplay. Or I find it interesting that it's a lot of time screenplays with not much dialogue win the Oscar, but then of course it's not quantity, is it? It's quality.
Yeah. I was just about to say that, man.
Yeah.
Quality over quantity. That's the key.
And I think, this does have quite an efficient use of dialogue, which I think makes up for a lot of silent, brooding scenes. But I guess obviously we can talk about the dialogue, but I think that mostly has been covered by talking about the actors, because of course dialogue is nothing without actors. But what the other thing the screenplay does, of course, is it tells the story in its own unique way, and I suppose one of the things we should talk about is flashbacks, because when I first watched this film, I was in two minds about what to think, in a way. I would say this is definitely a film that you think about, you stop watching it and you're left thinking about it, and you're not really sure whether or not you enjoy it. You're like, so I did think, and I don't usually do this in preparation for these kind of things, but I looked at another review, and I ended up finding not a review but a kind of video essay, because video essays are everywhere now. And it was talking about kind of the way Manchester by the Sea uses flashbacks to its advantage. And I know that I think you wrote down as a discrete category the use of flashbacks, so I'll let you take the steering wheel.
Well, I was going to say that flashbacks are generally very good in this movie. Sometimes when you're watching a movie, the flashbacks can feel, forced in and not natural. But these flashbacks did feel very natural. I think that's because they take place when you would, be having flashbacks or thinking to yourself about something. For example, when they're in the elevator, going down to see Lee's brother, and you get a flashback. And obviously, you're in the elevator. You're not talking. You're just thinking.
Yeah.
When you're in a car driving along, when Lee's going to Manchester, he's just sitting quietly thinking to himself. And when he's alone in bed asleep, and he's having a flashback about Patrick's mum.
Yeah.
I think the flashback to his kid's death, I don't think was that good, but that's another point that I'm going to make later about the plot. But go on.
Okay, well, I mean, we'll move on to the plot relatively quickly. I think, first of all, that I think, obviously the thing with flashbacks is that you use them when you want something in the past to be known, but not known beforehand. I mean, is a pretty obvious rule. For example,
Yes.
I don't know why, I always think of this whenever I think of flashbacks, mostly because I remember watching this film with Dylan and him getting confused about the fact there was a flashback. In Kill Bill, Uma Thurman is buried alive, and she's underground, and then you get a flashback to her learning Kung Fu from a Kung Fu master, and he teaches her to punch through wood. Now, there's a very obvious reason why that needs to be a flashback, because if you made the film in chronological order, you would have just a scene at the beginning, or towards the beginning, of her learning to punch through wood, and you'd be like, that's a bit weird, and then she'd get buried alive in a coffin, and you'd be like, oh, she can just punch through the wood. So obviously, I mean,
it relieves the tension.
Yes, it's a bit of an obvious thing to say, but the reason you have flashbacks in the film is because you want some things to be a mystery that happened in the past, because we come into this film at X point, and and then we find out things both forward and backwards. And obviously, one of the things this film doesn't tell us immediately is, why is this guy so upset or angry?
Yeah, there's a lot of mystery.
And the mystery, I think, I really liked the way the mystery element was handled in the first half. And then, of course, it is pretty much at the halfway point that you get this reveal. I think the flashback that shows how his kids died, I think was more kind of, I guess, kind of cheesy, because there was a bit where he looks off into the distance, and you can hear the guy he's talking to, the solicitor, I guess, saying Lee, because it's clear he's drifting off.
Well, just from a practical point of view, you get him obviously walking to the store, and saying goodbye to his friend, and it keeps cutting back to him just in the lawyer's office, and it's I think obviously the amount of time that elapsed in that in the flashback was far more than he actually would be.
Yes, so you're saying that he himself would not have been having that complete flashback.
Exactly. It was unrealistic to have that flashback.
Yes, I think,
while he's in the lawyer's office. So maybe what would be good in that situation is if he went home, and then Patrick asked him, "Why can't you be my guardian or whatever? What's the problem?" And then he sits down on his own on the sofa, and then has that flashback.
Yes, I think that
would have been better.
I think definitely you could make an argument that the execution was. I mean, the thing is, obviously, it's worth saying that's not the worst thing ever. I mean, most films.
No, it's not. No.
Most films will have unrealistic flashbacks, I think, but most of the flashbacks in this were quite realistic. I do agree with your point that obviously there's no chance that he literally played that out in his head, the whole thing as we see it, while he watched it. But I think obviously so the execution wasn't quite believable. I do think the placement of that flashback within the wider context of the story was very clever in terms of it was at a moment when, I mean, it was a very good moment. Obviously it's the moment when he finds out that he's going to have custody of his kids, and I think one of the things that I would say is that for me, I was beginning to find the character quite frustrating in a way, because it's like there's only so long you can watch a guy just be kind of very negative for no discernible reason, and not get kind of I don't want to say annoyed about it, but be like, well, what's the point in this guy? And then of course you find out, this is why. And once you find out why, of course, you're not going to be annoyed about it. And I think if they would have left it longer for that reveal, then I would be thinking, what is this guy's problem? And it would kind of reach a point where I was beginning to not feel sympathetic towards him. But then, so I think the halfway point was a good placement for it.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, for me, I knew there was going to be this flashback of what happened to his kids. So yeah, I guess that's the thing. There's going to be something that tells you why this guy is like he is. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you obviously, you going into it, you didn't know there was going to be a justification. But I mean, at first, I thought, because I think all I knew about the film going into it was that some guy goes to take care of his nephew after his brother died. That's all I knew going into this film. So when in the first kind of few scenes before he finds out his brother's dead, I thought that he was upset because his brother was dead. And then of course you find out that no, he doesn't even know his brother's dead. So yeah, I was, once I found out, his brother's already dead, I was like, okay, now what is the reason why he's upset? And yeah, it was kind of, I don't think I would have guessed anything quite as bad as, I mean, obviously, I guess the thing is you see his family. Yeah, so you do have this element of, he loses his family. Yeah, so I was like, I can see that, actually. I think, actually, one of the things that I do want to talk about while we're on this subject is how good the fact it was, or the way it was played. I was going to say how good it was that he killed his family. But I think the way it played out such that he killed his family, because obviously he, like I say, he is really guilty of some kind of neglect. I mean, you couldn't not. No one would not blame themselves.
Well, he realizes that, doesn't he?
Yes, exactly.
So yeah, I like how he's surprised he's in being punished.
I loved. Yeah, I thought that was a great scene.
By the police. I thought, it is, and he thinks he should be, and obviously he tries to do it himself.
Yes.
Tries to kill himself right after, because he's like, I'm not getting punished for this. I'm not getting sent to jail. I'm just going to do it myself, because I need to face some consequences for what I've done.
Yes, that's really good, and I think obviously that, I mean, there's kind of a great weight to. There's a scene, I think, later on in the film when he's being sent back, or he's getting back in a car to go down to Boston to move into his tiny little flat in the bottom of this, housing thing. But there's kind of this implied, and I think very sort of believable and tangible sense of, like, his brother is obviously has been trying to deal with him and has been having this huge journey, and you kind of do really feel the significance of his relationship with his brother, in the way that it's so clear that his brother is very concerned about his mental well-being, which obviously, I mean, it goes without saying in a way, but I think it's the film did a good job at kind of not having to show. There's no point when you really see his brother be like, I'm really concerned about you, but there's kind of a very, I mean, subtle is just something that comes up so often when describing the acting in this film, but a subtle, are you going to be okay if you don't come back and call it, or if you don't hear from you, I'm calling the police. And then I think there's a very good scene in a way where this is again the scene where he's sending him off. Joe Chandler says, Patrick, come say goodbye to your Uncle Lee. And Lee's like, don't worry about that, whatever. And Joe's like, no, I want him to do it. And then Lee says, I'm going to see him again. And obviously, that's one of the, and it's kind of the way he says it. I mean, first of all, obviously, you say, well, I'm going to see him again. Number one, it's kind of a silly thing to say in a way, because it's like, if someone's like, if I've gone to see a relatives and they're like, say goodbye, I'm like, no, it's okay, I'm going to see them again. But obviously, when I say I'm going to see them again, I'm not saying I'm not going to kill myself. I'm saying I'm going to see you again. Yeah. But then I also think there was a good way in that the way he said it almost sounded defeated. Like, it was like it was the sense of like,
yeah,
I'm not going to kill myself, but I'm sad about that. It's kind of, and I think maybe that's something that, I mean, I'm not an expert on these things, but I could imagine this idea of you reach a point where it's like you realize that, you know, obviously you can't kill yourself, for, you know, and hopefully anyone who is considering suicide reaches a point where they realize that they can't kill themselves just for, you know, I mean, family and not being dead. But of course there's probably also a moment where you realize, you know, okay, I'm not going to kill myself, but that doesn't change all the reasons I wanted to kill myself. You know, so if you decide that you want to kill yourself because you're being bullied, then okay, if you don't kill yourself, that's great, fantastic, but you're still being bullied. And in this case, it's kind of like he decides he's not going to kill himself because his children are dead and his wife has left him, but still his children are dead and his wife left him. It's kind of, I think it was clever in a way that it's like they turn this sense of, it's not just he's overcome suicidal tendencies and therefore it's fine. It's like he's overcome suicidal tendencies, but then where do you go from there? Everything that was wrong is still wrong, which I thought was quite heart-filled.
Yeah. It deals with the I guess the grief suffered by someone who's obviously lost like everything very well.
Yes.
Which is why I guess it got nominated for Best Picture as well.
Yes.
So I think that's the central reason why this movie is critically acclaimed.
Yes, exactly. I mean, if
things like that. Yeah.
That's one of the things that a lot of people. I mean, I think I watched. You know Mark Kermode, right?
Sorry, who?
Mark Kermode. I'm surprised. He is a Radio 5 presenter, but he's quite busy on YouTube.
No.
Okay.
No.
The thing is, I'm only surprised because he's one of those people who constantly comes up in my suggested videos, and it's not just. I mean, like obviously, I have watched it now, so obviously, the more you watch it, the more it comes up. But even before I watched any of his videos, he came up quite a bit. Okay, well, he reviewed Manchester by the Sea, and his basic takeaway was that this film does a very good job at dealing with, the most intense sadness. And I think, that's definitely, if you're going to give this film one big kind of
tick,
it would be for the way it presents that character. I don't think I wanted to say anything else about the flashbacks. Just it was very well handled.
No.
So the plot in general is obviously another thing that the screenwriter is responsible for, and I guess you've got. You mentioned there was something you wanted to say about the plot about his kids dying, I think.
Yeah, in relation to his kid's death.
Yes.
So the thing is, this movie, I think, has two competing sort of storylines. It's about Lee not being able to get over the death of his kids, and he says in the end of the movie, "I just can't beat it." His arc not actually being an arc, not being able to overcome that loss. But there's also the other side of this movie, which is his relationship with Patrick.
Yeah.
His what do you call it when it would be foster child?
Yeah.
But he's not really because he's not been adopted.
Yeah, but it's gay. We'll just say that. We'll let you off.
Yeah. So Anyway, what was I talking about? Oh yeah. So his relationship to his foster child, Patrick. And by the way, I just want to say, Patrick is very annoying. In a lot of instances. I don't know if you found that as well. I mean, that's just maybe how teenagers are, I guess.
Yes.
So
part of it is
about it.
annoying. I found him. I mean, like I say, the least believable thing about him to me was just that he was doing so well with the ladies. But I found his annoyingness basically believable.
Yeah.
I actually, to be honest, while you're talking about Patrick, I do want to say, I thought that there were a few moments where he did seem quite nice, and I did actually quite like him, especially, the moment where he tries to get Lee to interact with his girlfriend's mum, and he says kind of, just go in there and small talk to her, it could be good for both of us. and I think like that's a,
yeah, I know.
yeah. So I do.
But that
I do
was
think
for his own. That was for his own selfish reasons. Though.
you hate Patrick. Yeah, he never does anything good.
No, the thing is about Patrick, he doesn't think about anybody but himself.
No, yeah.
Which again, I think is believable, but at the same time, he doesn't understand what Lee has gone through and why he doesn't want to live in Manchester, despite the fact that he knows Lee's 3 kids have died, and obviously that he must understand. He understands at the end, obviously, when he sees Lee, after being in a fight, with like a black eye and a cut on his face, and then he goes up and looks in Lee's bedroom and he sees the pictures of his 3 dead kids, and then he gets it. Then he realizes, okay, now I understand. Why this guy maybe perhaps is struggling, moving back to the place where he lost everything. I just don't know why he couldn't realize that before. I guess it's believable.
Yeah,
but, yeah.
Yeah. I can see where you're coming from. I feel like I actually sidetracked you a bit there. You were talking about maybe you.
Oh yeah, I guess we're talking about the relationship between Patrick and Lee, so I guess it's relevant. By the way, he doesn't really seem to care that his dad's dead, which I guess maybe just a coping mechanism.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's one of those weird things. I mean, one of the things throughout this film that is kind of something that I guess is relevant is I did find myself wondering, like, how should someone respond to some of these things, Because obviously it's very easy to say it seems realistic or it seems unrealistic, but then, maybe it's different. I think one of the things actually that I've got to be honest about is that I think a lot of the time Patrick seems too reasonable, and when I say reasonable, I don't necessarily mean nice. But for example, they've just left the funeral parlour, and Lee is kicking off, and this guy walks past and he says, great parenting. And Patrick kind of stands in the way, like being like, no, don't do anything, like calming his uncle down, kind of trying to mitigate the situation. And I think one of the things that's a bit unbelievable in a way is that you never really have a moment where Patrick becomes completely kind of incensed with anger or does anything. I mean, like I say, I agree with you that he seems a bit kind of ignorant, I think would almost be the right word, about like just how much his uncle's been through, or a bit kind of doesn't have any regard for it. But he never seems to be so I guess what I say, he's an arsehole, but he's an arsehole in an indifferent way, which is different from what I think, if your dad's dead, I think you'd become an arsehole in a angry way, which I thought was missing.
Yeah, I guess so. Well, I guess what I wanted to say is I wish he was in the movie a bit less, and there was not just because I didn't like the character, but I think it would have served the plot better, because I think if you had more of Casey Affleck and more about him overcoming his kid's death and trying to assimilate back into Manchester.
Yeah. I want to talk about that actually, because I want to talk about that as part of its own kind of different point. So say what you want to say, but we'll return back to it.
Well, those are the two things, obviously. Him getting along with Patrick and how their relationship gradually gets better. But I don't think Patrick. Obviously, I think the central thing is how Lee is dealing with losing his kids. But so that's why I don't think it's that necessary to have Patrick in the movie as much as he is in the movie. He doesn't need to play that important part in the movie.
Okay.
It's not. Yeah. So go on. What did you?
I wanted to just talk about Patrick a bit more actually, because I should have mentioned this when we were talking about flashbacks, because I just remembered it. One of the things that I just did want to talk about was that Patrick, to me, or one of the things that I found interesting was when you watch, because I guess we're going to conclude by talking about our final thoughts, like later on. But I want to talk about when you watch the film for the second time, which is obviously kind of what this podcast is about. You know, you've seen it at the theatres. What's it like after that? When you watch this film for the second time, one of the things I found was that the beginning gets a lot better, because I said, I've already said it, I'll say it again, I think the beginning of this film, the first half, is better than the second half, in my opinion, and I'll kind of go into why I think that.
Yeah.
But one of the things that you see at the beginning of the first half that makes it so kind of interesting is you see his relationship with his nephew. And it's like they're on a boat, and he's kind of joking around with his kid, and he's like, "Hey, you know, if you were on a desert island, who would you want to bring, me or your father?" And he's like, you know,
my father.
I'd want to bring my dad. And he's like, "You don't know what you're talking about." And they're having like this fun. One of the things that I've heard about this film, and I have to talk about this, is that people say, "Oh, Lee, through his flashbacks, you see him as a happier person. And then in the present, you see him as a more miserable person." One of the things that actually kind of bothered me about the film, and I think this is one of my more legitimate criticisms in terms of like actually affecting my opinion of the film, is that I think Lee, when you watch him and his past family, you don't get that much of a sense of happiness. I mean, you get kind of it, but like, for example, I mean, the scene you see him and his wife in, she's kind of ill and, you know, a bit confrontational. And obviously, like, I'm not saying like people who are in love are never confrontational, but the point is, it's not like you see him being the happiest person in the world. And then the other thing is,
but that's Boston. Right?
Yeah, okay. And then the other thing is, and I guess you're also going to say this is Boston too. I can already see it. The scene when all the guys are being really drunk.
That is so.
The thing about that is obviously, you know, I mean, when I think about someone drinking loads and shouting at their wife and getting into an argument with their wife, I don't think, oh, he's really happy and his life's great. But I guess you're going to say, oh, in Boston, that's just... So yeah, okay, ignoring the fact
that's just standard.
But yeah, so what I want to say is that I didn't believe, and this was one of the things that kind of made the film actually worse for me, is that the film is supposed to show him being really miserable because his children are dead. And yet, in the 3 major scenes before his children die, number 1, when he finds out that Joe has congestive heart failure, which I guess it makes sense he wouldn't be happy then anyway, but number 2, when he comes back from fishing and his wife's ill and his kids, they're kind of having a disagreement over things like that, and he picks up his son, and his wife says, don't pick up his son. And number 3, when he gets drunk and shouts at his wife. In none of those 3 scenes did I see someone who was fantastically happy. However...
Well, he doesn't shout at his wife.
Okay, yeah. He kind of... Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Like, I'm not saying, like, that it's awful, but I am suggesting, like, you know, it's not like the happy... You know, anyway, one of the things... I will say this. The one thing that did make me believe that he used to be happy, really happy, was the way he interacted with Patrick in the few scenes you see him with before his kids are dead. You know, when they're on the boat, he seems really happy. And I think in that sense, there's some logic to having Patrick play into it a bit more. Although I agree with your claim that he probably shouldn't have been in it as much. Although I think part of that is because of who older Patrick was. I think if older Patrick was a more sympathetic character, he would have had more of a place in this film. Is generally my...
What do you mean by that?
So because older Patrick, I just call him regular Patrick, because Patrick is a bit of an arsehole, it means that he can't really become I think he can only be a small part of the film, because he can't really be a major part of Lee overcoming his own misery, when for the large part of the beginning of the film he doesn't even seem to comprehend the full extent of Lee's misery. So if he had been written to be more aware, then I think he could have been a more interesting addition to the story.
Yeah. Yeah, that is true. Yeah.
So, did you have anything more to say about plot?
Well, I was going to talk about the kid's death a bit more.
That's fine. Yeah, absolutely.
In the plot. Okay. So, obviously, like you say, it's a mystery. It happens about 50 minutes in that you find out what happened to his kids. And I was just going to say it's kind of similar to my last point about how obviously the main driving point of the movie is that he learns, or he becomes Patrick's guardian, and he learns that he's going to become the guardian for Patrick, which is like a very significant thing, maybe the second most significant thing in the movie.
Yeah.
And then right after that, you get the most significant thing in the movie, which is his kids died. Like what I'm just trying to say goes back again to my idea that it should have been like a 5 minutes, and then we should have learned his kids are dead. Those two major things happen like instantly.
Yeah, and that's, I guess, that probably plays into why we both think that we prefer the first half of the film, because the two big things happen bang bang.
Yeah, exactly, and I don't think it didn't need to be structured that poorly. Could have been structured better.
Yeah, I mean, I actually kind of want to disagree with you on one thing, but it's the thing I want to end on, so I'm just gonna I won't forget. I just want to talk about one thing about the plot. Is there were a few scenes in the film, or maybe not even a few, which felt to me kind of like pointless, and I don't know if there was supposed to be some kind of interpretation of them. And one of those major scenes was everything to do with his mum, Patrick's mum. I mean, the one thing that was obvious was that it seemed to me like Lee didn't like Patrick's mum because Patrick's mum was an alcoholic, and Lee drinking a lot of alcohol led to his mistake, and therefore maybe he's suspicious of that. Although I don't know if that's even... It might just be that he personally doesn't like her, because he doesn't seem to like her at the beginning of the film either. During that flashback.
Exactly. I just think he thinks she's a bad mother, probably.
Yeah, and
it's as simple as that.
But obviously the thing is, I mean, that's one thing, but then you have this entire scene of like she's a Christian, and he goes to her house, and then it's kind of a bit weird, and then she's like, oh, you don't have to be so formal, and then at the end, obviously, she seems to leave the room, and Christian dad says, you know, oh, I better go see what she's up to. I think the implication there is supposed to be that he thinks she might have, and maybe she has, gone into the kitchen and gone to have a quick drink of alcohol because she's a bit kind of emotional or something like that.
Yeah, she can't deal with it.
And then the next scene is the dad or the Christian saying, sorry, but we think that your presence there might be a bit much for your mother. And the thing is, it felt a bit like filler. Like, there wasn't anything I really got from it.
Unnecessary.
Yeah,
I mean, maybe it's just to cancel out the option to live with his mother.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the thing is, I think there's...
seems a lot for that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I did feel like a lot of the second part of the film felt a bit like filler. But actually, to be honest, I think that's the only major thing where I mean, a lot of it felt kind of pointless, but that's the only bit where I was really like, okay, a whole scene where I was just like, what's happening with that? I have one kind of big point to end on. Do you have any points at all, actually?
Yeah, I did, actually. I did have something to say, and I wanted to talk about how this movie, it's so weird to say this in this kind of depressing movie, but it made me laugh a couple of times. And there was a lot of moments in this movie of unintentional comedy.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I've already mentioned the bit with I mentioned at the hospital when he finds out that his brother's dead, you know, and there's a bit of kind of humour to it.
But that humour right there works because it's a human reaction. So there are just some things in the movie which have been written in and are kind of pointless, needless, and I'll just explain this. So, well, basically things go wrong so much, particularly in the middle part of the movie, that it's kind of farcical. So, for example, the phone in the funeral, when his son can't shut his phone off.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's a bit silly.
Yeah. And then back to back, right after that, you have at the party, Lee being unable, or Lee's friend, who was Joe's friend, you know, the guy who eventually takes Patrick in.
Yeah.
Yeah, so unable to communicate across the room because it's so loud that Lee doesn't
Oh
actually want
yeah,
any food.
yeah. I think there was kind of that element of. I mean, obviously, one of the things that I like is films that kind of acknowledge that real life is funny, because real life. I mean, funny things happen in real life.
Then there's the phone not working in the car. At the beginning when Lee's calling Patrick's principal.
Yeah.
And them struggling to find out where the car is parked. And then I think the worst thing, which really didn't need to be in here, was when you know, his wife is, after their house burned down, his wife, they can't get her in the ambulance.
Oh yeah, that was
Yeah, and I was just like, oh, this is kind of making me.
It dragged out a bit, especially
serious.
On the first watch. I thought to myself, okay, this is. I mean, like, the thing is, like, I guess.
Yeah, this is going on a lot. Yeah. I mean, you got the serious backdrop and something just funny happening.
Yes.
Like, it's kind of comical, and it's like, yeah, there maybe should be some funny music.
Yeah,
over the backdrop.
I think it's kind of falls into. I mean, I talk about this a lot nowadays. The boyhood defense, which is whenever anything happens that isn't cinematic, the response is, well, real life isn't cinematic. So if something happens that's completely out of tone with the rest of the film, people will go, well, in real life, things happen that are out of tone with the rest of the film.
The thing is, I don't think it's intended to be out of tone. It's intended to show how shit life is. I think, like, his phone's not working. They can't get the wife in the ambulance. But it just comes off like as kind of comedic.
Yeah.
Which I know is kind of like bad for me, maybe because it's like quite dark. But yeah, that's how I feel, I guess.
I think, you know what, on the subject of phones going off, I've actually not mentioned this at all. I don't know why I would mention it actually, but long story short, I went to a job interview yesterday actually, which is really surprising because, well, it doesn't matter why it's surprising. Anyway, I went to a job interview yesterday. The thing is, this woman's phone went off. It was kind of a group interview, but very small group interview. Woman's phone went off while we were there, and the guy was like, don't worry about it, I mean, turn it off if you want to, but if you think it's important, you can take it, don't worry, obviously nowadays everyone's got mobile phones on them, it's not really an issue if your mobile phone goes off. She turned it off, and then she put it back in her coat, and then her phone went off again in her coat. So she hadn't put it on silent or anything, and he was like, do you want to take that? Don't worry about it, your phone's going off, pick it up. She did nothing. She just stared at him while her phone was going off, and it rang for like a long time, and he just carried on talking and her phone was ringing. I was like, what are you doing? But that's just anyway. I agree with you.
Life can be funny.
Yes, life can be funny, and incidentally, my dad had just died when I after that, and I laughed and laughed.
They couldn't get your dad in the ambulance.
and he died. What happened is they closed the door on his head and it came off and it went and popped off. I think that would have been good if the death.
And there was really sad music, so it's serious.
You know what's actually?
But in actual fact,
you reminded me of at the end of Final Destination 2. There's a scene. I mean, I'm not going to set up the entire plot of Final Destination 2, but they say that they go to visit this family, and there's a kid there, and the kid's about like 16, 15, and they go over to the barbecue and get something from the barbecue. So he runs over to the barbecue, and then they say basically some information that reveals to our main characters that this kid's about to die. They basically say, and he got rescued by this thing, and the logic in Final Destination, I guess is like people get rescued when they're not supposed to, and that means they're going to die. So they look over to the barbecue, and there's this explosion, and then a leg lands in front of the mum, and she's screaming in front of her dead son's severed leg, and it turns to the main characters, and they genuinely look at each other like knowingly with like a huh, what are you gonna do? And then it starts playing this like pop, I don't know, like whatever the soundtrack for Final Destination is, I can't remember, but like this kind of like rocky, like yeah, it's death.
Yeah.
And it's the most bizarre thing. But yeah, I mean, obviously in Final Destination, you know, slightly different film to Manchester by the Sea.
Well, I don't know. A lot of people die in both movies.
That's true. Is that everything? I feel like I keep asking. Is that everything? Okay.
Yeah.
I wanted to finish on a final point, which is we've kind of been, I think, skirting around the fact, because at the end of this, I am going to reveal that this film is not my favourite film we've reviewed so far. But we've only really, I mean, we've said quite a few positive things about it. So I want to kind of go into why, for me, basically, this film is not the best film I've ever seen. And for me, the problem can kind of be summarised, and I think it's a problem a lot of people are going to have with this film, is that it's so intensely miserable. And I think that's going to be, I mean, you know, you can't fault the acting. You can't I mean, you can kind of fault the structure. But there's lots of things you can't fault about this film, but everything's in service of this plot that just leaves you feeling like, you know, complete shit.
Yeah. Well, it's meant to be intensely miserable because it's meant to make you feel. Some people just can't get over like grief. Some people's lives are shit. I mean, I guess that's the point.
I kind of have like a variety of kind of thoughts on that. The first thing that bothers me about the way this film's presented is that I actually do wonder how realistic this is, and maybe this isn't necessarily like a real criticism of the film, but I wonder like how much someone can actually be that miserable. And I also wonder like how, because I think usually, I mean, the stereotype is people who are depressed, you know, are often quite friendly, and you know they'll be, you know, people can be depressed but be happy and stuff like that. And obviously one of the things you get in this film is, for example, a woman says at the beginning, he says, "Can I give you a tip?" And he goes, "Like a suggestion?" And it's like, it's almost like one of those things where it's like, okay, so does being really sad make you a moron? And then there's another bit where, I mean, he can't have small talk. He's supposed to be kind of keeping this woman occupied while her daughter gets banged, and the what's his name, Patrick, basically says, you know, can't you just have small talk like a normal person? And I agree with you. It's like, well, you know, I'm just like Patrick, and I'm not understanding the severity of what he's been through. And I agree with that. But on the other hand, can't he just make small talk like a normal person? Can't he, Luke? No, I do think, I mean, the thing is, I think in my mind, like, I would have preferred, just in terms of his characterization, if there was an attempt on his part. So it was kind of like, I mean, we've mentioned, and I've mentioned, that one of the things that we talk about in this film is the subtlety. There's a lot of subtlety in the characters, and I actually find that it kind of becomes less subtle the more you think, okay, so it makes sense the way he reacts to his brother dying. Okay, his brother's just died, so obviously he's going to be a bit miserable, whatever else. But then he's talking to this relatively attractive MILF who wants to bang him, and he's still acting the same. And it's kind of like, I get, like, okay, being sad can be a habitual thing that every day you deal with, especially if something horrible's happened to you, but I think it would have made his character more interesting and more believable if there was an element to which it actually was a bit more plastic to his situation.
Yeah, but I just think though that the whole point in the movie, the whole reason why it was made, why it was constructed, was to just show this guy who was just miserable beyond belief. And so if he was slightly less miserable, slightly more normal, then I guess that, like, how would somebody come up with the idea then?
Yeah.
Because I guess the idea was created like, hey, let's just
the most miserable person we can and see how it works.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think, I mean, I still, regardless of that being the point of the film, I'm still going to criticise it a bit more for it, because one of the problems I think with the film, and this is why, and I think this is partially structure and partially characterization. The and this is where I'm kind of going to properly get into this. The way that the second act or the second part of the film got worse, and to me it was because there wasn't. I mean, you said yourself, he's a character without an arc.
Yes.
And I kind of agree, and I think that to me is something that, you know, intentional though it might be, made me not that interested in the film, because it's kind of like, okay, what happens? Oh, he does this thing and then he's sad, and he does this thing and then he's sad. The weird thing about the film is that there's a very subtly implied arc, in that he says kind of at the end, you know, oh, if you want to come visit me, and that's kind of like, okay, so maybe he's slightly better. But the thing is, you know,
there's no happy ending.
Yeah.
But I guess it's as happy as he can be.
I mean, I found that the second half of the film was actually really boring, and that's why I would say is it was, I mean, like I say, two at least really great scenes, in my opinion, in the second half. But in my opinion, this film could have been almost, you know, it's a very good first half, and then there's two good scenes after that. But apart from that, it's this kid trying to bang a girl, and he's in a band and the drummer can't drum.
Oh yeah,
and
fucking Otis.
Yeah, and it's like, and it's complete monotony and just not. Yeah, I've got to be honest, I didn't find it that interesting.
No, yeah. Well, I was going to say the movie is 2 hours and 16 minutes.
Yes, I don't think it didn't earn that length.
So if you cut like 20 minutes out of it, and most of the scenes involving Patrick, which obviously I think it'd make the movie better. And also, I think I'd enjoy it.
Yeah. Also, I think him having two girlfriends was kind of pointless. Just on the side, there was no real reason.
Well, actually, it's I guess there's no reason.
Yeah, I mean, you see her at the first, and then you never see her again. I mean, like, you see her at the beginning, and then I don't know why they did that. I guess, I don't know. I feel like maybe it was supposed to be like, I don't know. I guess we were supposed to learn something about his character, but it's kind of just like, I just learned he's an arsehole. But actually, I mean,
so this movie would be a lot better if they cut some of that time in the second half. Because, like you say, that there's a lot of build up to the eventual thing about him being the Guardian and his kids dying, and then after that,
it plateaus, is what it does. I wanted to ask you about this, because I think this is something that I wouldn't posit as a criticism, but I'm going to ask you about it in such a way as to put it in the mind of the viewer. What do you think about him being a complete arsehole? Lee. I mean, the thing, I say complete arsehole. So he has this thing where he like punches people randomly and things like that. And to me, I think,
that's to let his emotion out.
Yeah, I know. I think it's an interesting
and it's a
thing.
very Boston thing to do as well.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, if it was back to Boston is 99% of your defense of this film has been, well, it's in Boston.
Well, that's why I said it's just the perfect place for this movie to be set, because it works so well.
Yeah, I think it's, well, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how I feel about him being an arsehole. I think to be honest, I've got to admit that it's not one of those things that I'd say it's bad, but I also have to admit I'd have liked the film more if he was a bit more like sympathetic. I don't know exactly how. I think there's two things that kind of compounded to make me not feel that sorry for him. And first of all, it was the fact that he was aggressive and a bit kind of, an arsehole. And then second, on top of that, it was the fact that, in my opinion, the second half of the film did a disservice to how well his character was drawn and acted. Because it was, a really great portrayal of intense misery, but because it just became complete monotony in the second half, because it just became, oh, he's sad, oh, how's he going to react to this thing? Is he going to react like he's kind of disinterested and emotionally disconnected? Oh, look, he reacted as if he was disinterested and emotionally disconnected. Almost without... There's, like, the closest thing... I mean, there's a few good beats, which is, number one, the way he reacts to the panic attack. Okay, he seems kind of like he actually cares there. And number two, the scene where he says, do you want to sell these guns.
Guns.
To pay for a
guns
motor, and that's kind of then it's kind of setting up like, okay, he's slightly happy. And then there's two good scenes in the second half where you see his misery in a more interesting way. Obviously, there's the scene with his wife where he says, or his ex-wife, where he says, "There's nothing here," which I think is one of the pretty devastating description of being just that sad. And then obviously the other bit being when he looks out at Manchester by the sea, and he just punches the window, which I guess, and that just shows kind of, I mean, obviously the film's called Manchester by the Sea, and when that happens, you look for kind of, in what sense is this film about the place? And in this case, it's because he seems to have this kind of intense hatred of this town.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to say, you mentioned the second half is pretty boring. And to be honest, even though this film is critically acclaimed, and I normally do like films that are critically acclaimed, I wasn't really looking forward to watching this for a second time.
I was not,
mainly because it was like, oh, I'm going to have to sit through him driving fucking Patrick to band practice again.
Yeah,
I'm going to have to sit through that. And so
I 100% agree.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. Like, one of the things that I think I've said is that the relationship between him and Patrick shown at the beginning in the flashbacks is a lot more interesting upon the second watch. And there was a lot in the first part. I mean, again, this completely makes sense because all the stuff before the big reveal, when you watch it, kind of knowing how the film plays out, becomes more interesting because you've got this element of you know where it's going, and that kind of makes it better. And I found the first half a lot shorter, but I mean the second half gets more boring and I think feels almost more long when you know everything that's happening. And I agree with that.
Maybe that's an artistic choice to make it feel so boring that you yourself are miserable watching.
Yeah, I know.
Well, I just wanted to say, Michael, capping off this misery.
I've got one more thing. Well, actually, it's not really. But actually, I'll let you cap it off because I think my thing is.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, so it's miserable. That is clear. That's what it says on the box and the package. And you know what you're getting into when you watch this movie. Its reputation precedes itself. And obviously that doesn't make it very enjoyable. But I guess the other side of the coin to a miserable movie is it can make you emotional. It can make you sort of. And I just want to read a few reviews actually.
That's I can definitely. I mean, I can understand. I can predict already why people enjoyed this film, but it would be interesting to hear anyway.
So Peter Travis says it takes a piece out of you. RogerEbert.com's Mark Zoller site.
Mark Zuckerberg
says. This is the kind of movie you'll want to see a second time, which is ironic, and with someone who hasn't seen it, to remember what it was like to watch for the first time. And someone else says it's often hard to watch. That is Leah Greenblatt says it's exquisitely crafted, emotionally ragged, and hard to watch. I did not feel this way watching this movie. I did not feel emotional. I did not feel it took a piece out of me.
Yeah.
And I didn't feel like it was that emotionally ragged. I watched it and I was like, oh, okay, guess what have I got to do next? I wasn't contemplating the movie at all, I guess.
I found the only thing that I was contemplating about the movie was just, did I like that? I wasn't thinking to myself like, oh, I'm so sad about it. There's one thing I've just, all the time you've been talking, I just went through my notes about kind of all the different bits about it being miserable to see what I've already covered, and I actually have a fair few things to cover actually, because I want to talk about, actually I think I know what order I'm going to put this in. Okay, so first of all I want to talk about how, in my opinion, this film, the problem with the second half, and I'm just talking about the second half again, is that I think it does a disservice to the reveal of his kids dying. Because in my opinion, his kids dying should be pretty much peak misery. Maybe you can return back to that point, and that's why that's what I sort of mean about how it would have been nice to see moments where he appears to act happy, moments where he does seem to be slightly more happy, because that way the sad moments stand out more. And I actually find that, I mean, obviously contrary to him being really miserable making the film more emotional, I found that him being miserable actually made the really emotional scenes less impactful. When I'd seen him just get sad for no reason, pretty much, it then became, okay, well, what about, the scene where his kids are dead and things like that. Yeah, so I do think...
I guess so.
The other thing I wanted to talk about is that... I was thinking about this while I was watching it. You know how in horror films there is a character you want, and we saw this in Get Out, who shouts at the protagonist what the audience is thinking, or shouts at the protagonist, "Don't do that, are you stupid?" I mean, that doesn't usually happen in horror films, but it's what you want to see in a horror film. I'd be interested to see kind of a character in one of these very sort of... I always want to use the word arty. When I say arty, I kind of just mean pretentious, but I use pretentious not necessarily as a bad thing. There are films that I admit are pretentious that I love, but like American Beauty in a way. Well, let's not talk about that now. But one of these films where it's kind of just a character study, where the main drive of the character is that he's sad. I kind of wish you had a character who was like the TSA agent in Get Out, who just kind of is like, "What are you doing? Why are you so miserable? Sort yourself out." But one film I do want to recommend, because we're never going to review it on this podcast, so you don't need to watch it for the sake of this podcast, but there's a film called The Station Agent, starring Peter Dinklage. I guess you know Peter Dinklage. Yeah.
Yes,
and
Game of Thrones guy.
I'm not going to say anything about it apart from the fact that it, like this film, is about someone who's just really, really miserable and secluded. But unlike this film, it has a real kind of heart to it that comes about from seeing characters rally around this miserable person. Whereas in this film, I mean, it doesn't have a heart. And of course, yes, the response is you always return back to, well, it doesn't have a heart because it's presenting this cynical view of the world. And I guess, yes, but I didn't find that interesting. And the penultimate thing I want to say, before I'm pretty much done... Actually, you know what? I mean, no, I'm not going to let you say anything else because this is all about the misery thing, and I think that's important.
Okay.
I think a lot of people might say in a kind of I can't think what the word is, derogatory way to us. They say, you just don't like this film because you can't handle how real it is. You want to watch Zootopia. You want to watch a happy, lovely film, and you can't handle that this film is miserable and things like that. But I want to talk about how there are miserable films that I like. I mean, I just mentioned The Station Agent, but I guess people will say, well, The Station Agent doesn't count because people are happy in that. But then you look at, for example, A Serious Man. A Serious Man, which I've always, it's my favourite film, I've mentioned it on here before, is a film about someone whose life is just completely going to shit. And the film ends with him finding out that he's presumably got cancer. So, it's not a happy film at all. But what I like about A Serious Man is that it is challenging and thought-provoking in terms of it presents questions. It deals with questions of, like, why do we have this suffering? And that's something that I kind of stand by. There are a lot of really good, miserable films that ask and provoke interesting questions. I don't know that this film asked any interesting questions. I don't know that I got much from this film. I don't know if
you mentioned before it wasn't very interesting.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think that is very true. It's not interesting.
I think, but even on a thematic level, so I think both on the plot it wasn't that interesting, and also on a thematic level, what are the themes of this film? I mean, obviously, we could talk about that, but I think the short answer is there aren't. I mean, the themes of this film aren't things that I don't think you're going to take them to bed with you. And the final thing I wanted to say, because again, this is something I do a lot. I talk about what I would have liked a film to be, or kind of what I think a film should have been. And I don't really have a whole plot here, but just on the subject of it being miserable, I don't have a problem with the first half, pretty much. I mean, obviously, maybe there's a few things I'd change. What I wish with the second half of the film is that they would have had him trying to get happy, trying to interact, showing some genuine improvement, like a character arc, and then, at the end, you could have had a scene where he says, I can't beat this. You could have had that I can't beat this scene, and you could have this element of, you've seen him over this last, and that way the film could have been 2 hours and 20 minutes, because, an hour in, you see him, he finds out, you find out, oh, he's been through this horrible thing. And then after that, the film picks up a bit. It gets a bit happier, it gets a bit better. And then,
maybe he goes on a date with
mom. Yeah, and you've seen him become this happier person. And then at the end of it, kind of very close towards the end, he says, I can't beat this. At the end of the day, I know, you've seen me, the audience, you've seen me go on this journey where I've kind of appeared to get happier, but at the end of the day, just like that moment where I said that, I wasn't going to kill myself, yeah, okay, I'm going to try my hardest, but what happened is never going to have not happened, and things like that. And I think that would have been an arc in the second half. So you see, really sad, bottom of the bottom, his kids are dead in a fire at his own hand, he tries to commit suicide. Then you have, oh, things are getting better. Not just he's miserable for the whole second half of the film, things are starting to get better. And then at the end, and again, what I would say about that is, of course, then you can't say, well, you just don't like the film because it's miserable. Because that would be a very miserable ending to have, no matter how happy I seem, I will always deep down inside be miserable. So I do think, and that's why, obviously, I find this kind of idea of what should the film have been a useful way for me to think about, do I like the film? And I think, in my mind, I just think there were so many missed opportunities. So do you have anything else? I know I hijacked it a bit there.
No, I'm just going to sum up, I guess, give my final thoughts. So, like you said, the misery makes it, I guess, not enjoyable, but also, as you laid out just there, the lack of interest in the actual movie, the lack of interesting things that happen, makes it also, I guess, unenjoyable. The fact that the second half is quite boring. And like I said before, that could be the other side of the coin is, it's very emotional. Maybe miserable, but it's emotional. I didn't find it emotional.
No, I agree.
Really, at all. Yeah, apart from the one scene between Lee and his wife, Sandy, or ex-wife, that was emotional. That was that was good. That was like the highlight of the whole movie. I wish more.
I think that was.
I wish
good.
more scenes were like that. Yeah. But yeah, I guess all those things made it a pretty. I mean, it's not obviously a bad movie.
No, it's definitely it's not a bad film.
Obviously, but yeah, it's just like I don't want to really see this again.
No, yeah, exactly.
So, where do you put this in your ranks?
Actually, just before that, I wanted to mention just one thing, because I didn't mention this and I did write it down. I never had a place for it. I thought the music choice was interesting, and that's what I wanted to say.
Yeah.
I think the music's quite nice. Yeah. But that's that aside. So for the first time ever, actually, I kind of wrote down. I now have a list. Obviously, we've got an Excel sheet where we write down all the films, or we've planned out all the films we're going to review. I've now got another book in that Excel sheet. No, another sheet in that. I don't know how it works. I've got another little tabby thing at the bottom, which is my actual list of. It's actually all the films I've seen. The ones we haven't done a podcast on yet are in grey. So I was thinking, where should I put this? And this was the first time that I've actually thought about, actually had a real thought about where I should put it. So I'm going to have to talk about this just a bit. Is this film worse than Get Out? Yes. So let's start there. Then I think it gets a bit more interesting. Is this film worse than Zootopia? Because, the argument with Zootopia is, well, it's kind of a stupid kids film. This is an intelligent arts film. For me, personally, I think Zootopia, it has a lot of interesting stuff in it, and it's got a good plot, good character arcs. You'll enjoy it. And in my opinion, this film's worse than Zootopia.
I agree with that.
Now, then we confront, is this film worse than Dunkirk? There's no chance this film is worse than 50 Shades Darker, for the record. So the only thing is it above or below Dunkirk?
Wait, did you say 50 Shades Darker was better than 50 Shades Darker?
I did, actually. Which I guess, well, I don't know. We can... we're not going to talk about that now. So, I actually think that... this film is better than Dunkirk. And this, to be honest, I realised at this point that this is going to be mostly just kind of a reflection, more of a reflection on Dunkirk than by Manchester by the Sea, because I think both Dunkirk and Manchester by the Sea had an element of feeling kind of repetitive and boring and just, you know, so depressing that they didn't even seem to have a point. But I think at least Manchester by the Sea had a character, had one character. Well, two characters maybe. Yeah. So yeah, I think for me personally, my official order, for those who don't remember, is Arrival, Get Out, Zootopia, Manchester by the Sea, Dunkirk, 50 Shades Darker, 50 Shades of Grey. And one
maybe
other
I
thing,
should start doing this.
Just what I wanted to say, because you mentioned this on watching the film again. I mean, I've already mentioned. I was going to say, if maybe, I don't even know if it's worth watching. Well, the thing is, it's really annoying because there are some really great scenes in the second half that are worth watching, but you have to get through so much crap, and I almost think, like, you know, it would be good if there was a way for people to avoid that, the crap in the second half. But I would say, watch it.
A fan edit.
Yeah, fan edit, I guess. But watch it until watch it the first time until you think it's completely stranger of patience. You should make it. There's a good hour of entertainment in this, and to be honest, that hour of entertainment you get at the beginning, you can watch again. I don't know. My advice would almost be, you know, type into YouTube, basically, kind of, I don't know, the scene where he talks to his wife, maybe the scene where Patrick has a panic attack, and maybe ending. Type in those 3 scenes, watch the first hour of the film, and then just watch those 3 scenes after each other, and you'll pretty much have a pretty complete film.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I'm gonna give it a 7 out of 10, which is the same I gave as Dunkirk. But I think this, if I had to pick which movie is better, I'd say this movie is better. But I would probably, I don't know, would I like to watch Dunkirk again more than this? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I was thinking that too. And to be honest, it's actually, I'm not particularly excited about watching either of these films again.
No, yeah,
so
I get it.
It's hard
yeah,
to say.
That is the case. But yeah, it's not as good as Zootopia, like you say. I gave Zootopia an 8, I believe. So yeah, 7 out of 10 for Manchester by the Sea.
Alright, and I think we're ready to wrap up, so I'll just say that, of course, we have been reviewing the Oscar winners from last year. We've just reviewed Manchester by the Sea, which won Best Actor and Best Screenplay. We will next be reviewing La La Land, which won Best Actress and Best Director. I think it won another thing like Best Musical Number, but the main thing we're selecting it for is Best Actress and Best Director.
And of course it won Best Picture for 5 seconds.
Yes. So, and I look forward to having that next week. Next week. I need to go get some dinner now because you have dinner quite early. I have dinner quite late, and we end up recording this podcast at about 6.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I'm off to watch Real Madrid PSG now.
All right.
So yeah, thank you for watching Select and Reflect.
Yes, and thank you. I've been Michael. Not going to say my surname. It's a surname for the first time.
By the way, you didn't edit it out last week.
I know. I noticed that. I said I would. It's embarrassing. I mean, it doesn't really matter. Like, and you've been Luke. And
I have.
Bye.